Is there any indication to you that China is going to stop buying Iranian oil?
Well, look, the thing is, what's interesting about China is that already the blockade that's in place is having an impact on China. So the Chinese, the Iranian barrels that were going to China and have been for many years now, they were primarily not going to the main state oil companies, the main refiners. They were going to what is known as teapots, so these smaller refineries, independent refineries, who were very happy to take sanctioned and discounted crude.
So there was a really interesting photo that was published by the news outlet and ship monitoring organization Tanker Trackers. It showed it was like a satellite photo or maybe a drone photo, probably a satellite photo, that showed the ship-to-ship transfers that are taking place in the Strait of Hormuz. Basically in the Persian Gulf right now, the Strait of Hormuz is somewhat closed because private ships just don't want to take the risk of crossing in the middle of the hostilities, with Iran essentially being unable to guarantee safe passages for the ship. There have been mines that have been set up in the middle of the Strait of Hormuz through the main channels that were used to cross the waterway in the past. And what you have now is you have these ships and they load up with petroleum or natural gas in southern Iraq or in Kuwait or the United Arab Emirates and maybe Saudi Arabia on the Persian Gulf ports there, and then, or Qatar, where they have the natural gas, the world's natural gas reserves, world's largest natural gas reserves. And then they cross over to just before they get to the Strait of Hormuz, and then they move the stuff that they're holding, moving the material that they're holding from those ships, from those private ships, into government-owned ships, government-owned and licensed ships, perhaps by the United Arab Emirates, guaranteed by the United States. These ships, they don't have to answer to the same insurance protocols and the same shareholder boardroom protocols that the private ships have to answer to. And so then they move these onto these ships, and then those ships, those government-owned ships, will move the oil or gas through the Strait of Hormuz, taking on the risk. And then once they get out of the Strait of Hormuz, they load it back onto private ships to get it out of the Persian Gulf. And this photo sort of illustrates that. According to Tanker Trackers, at least one of those ships was loading Iranian gas onto it. Basically, perhaps a private shipment of Iranian gas that used the same protocol to move the energy out of the Persian Gulf. And this is one of the reasons why the price of petroleum has not skyrocketed and the price of natural gas and energy has not gotten out of control. It's because of this operation, this very expensive, pricey, high-risk operation that they're conducting. And one of the questions many are asking is, why are the Iranians allowing this? My speculation is that the Iranians are getting a cut. They're getting their piece of the action. They're getting paid off in some way or another. I'm Borzu Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands. You can subscribe at borzu.substack.com. I'm also on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on, where else am I? On YouTube. I'm on YouTube as well. Nader Etiam is here. Nader Etiam, thank you so much. Nader is an energy analyst. We're going to be talking all about energy today, and the head of MENA operations at Argus Media. This is a news outlet that focuses on energy markets worldwide. In the edition today, I have an interview with India's NewsX World in which we discuss whether countries around the world, including India, will abide by the U.S. sanctions and whether these sanctions have any kind of force of law, or if it's just a matter of the United States trying to bully other countries into abiding by U.S. rules and laws.
Now, we are first examining what has just taken place, and it's off the wider that the U.S. had stated before that it was going to be sanctioning economic sanctions on anyone who does trade with Iran. Now, how is this being perceived, and on a much wider level? Now, we know that India has managed to maintain strategic ties with both Washington and Tehran. Now, does this latest move actually put New Delhi in an increasingly difficult position between its two partners?
Well, I mean, just the fact that the way that these sanctions are being described as some kind of punishment for nefarious activity, this is just normal trade. And the United States is essentially trying to criminalize normal trade. There is no United Nations Security Council resolution condemning this trade or sanctioning this trade. This is purely from the Trump administration. administration. This is not weapons being moved. This is not some kind of illegal activity. There's no allegation of terrorism. This is just normal trade between two countries that the U.S. is trying to interfere in, essentially. And just the way that it's being framed, the whole media operation, the way the international media is covering it is meant to stigmatize any kind of normal business between Iran and the rest of the world. And I think that for India, yes, India is in a tough situation, but I think there's issues of sovereignty here, basic issues of whether one country can dictate to another how it should do business. And for a country as nationalistic as India is right now, I think that perhaps the mood is going to be a little bit like, no, we don't really want to abide by sanctions. We want to find ways of working around these sanctions. And I think that there's going to be a lot of pushback. Even in the New York Times today, there was a big story about how many countries around the world are pushing back against the Trump administration as opposed to acceding to its increasingly belligerent and reckless demands.
Now, Mr. Barzo Daragahi, are we to see more countries actually being pulled out and also being sanctioned for this? As we have seen that the Donald Trump administration literally recalled things that were happening from 2023 to 2026, February 2026, that is before the war even began. Are we to see the U.S. Trump administration actually call out more countries that actually sanction more countries economically due to their previous engagement with Iran?
Yeah, I think that you're going to see that. But just as I said before, who is the U.S. to sanction this country and that country just because they control the dollar, because the dollar is the world's reserve currency and currency of choice? That could change really fast if the U.S. keeps acting in this particular way. It's really dangerous for the U.S. economy, especially if you look at the way that the U.S. economy is in trouble right now with the debt, with the rising debt and the rising yield on the long-term treasuries that are taking place, and the interventions that Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has had to make just to keep the U.S. economy afloat. This is really kind of damaging. It's just basically a way of keeping the pressure on Iran, even after the military operations failed. It's rather irresponsible. And I think that, yes, no matter what the U.S. does, people should call it out.
Now, Mr. Dargai, does Washington actually have a legitimate enforcement concern here over these accusations that they're throwing? Or is it just an example of the U.S. actually using its financial power to dictate who other countries trade with? And in the same way, is it being a bully to these countries as it's more perpetually dictating who these countries trade with, who these countries are allowed to and not to trade with?
I think it's a little bit of bullying. I think that the U.S. has the mechanism to control the dollar as a reserve currency of the world, and the petrodollar, and the ability to choke off the world and use its control over the dollar to punish countries. But if it does that, if the U.S. uses its control over the dollar to bully countries around in this particular way, doesn't that kind of give Iran the same right to use its choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, to bully countries around? I mean, if you're going to live in this kind of lawless, reckless way, that's going to have consequences. Doesn't then Singapore and Malaysia have the right to put in positions and use their control over the Strait of Malacca? There's all sorts of implications for the way the U.S. is behaving. The proper way to behave, if you have a grievance with a country, you go to the UN Security Council, you bring up that grievance, and you try to get an international imprimatur on your action. And in this particular case, the U.S. isn't even giving a nod to the UN Security Council. It's merely going ahead and announcing these sanctions as if U.S. law is equivalent to global laws. In addition, there was a kind of an interesting thing that happened. You may not know that I'm also very interested in tech and finance, and I have a part-time job in which I work as a journalist for a wire service focusing on finance and tech. And there was this announcement that the founder of Microsoft, Bill Gates, that he's going to China to meet with the Chinese leadership about putting guardrails on the expansion of artificial intelligence worldwide. Now, why would Bill Gates do this? I think it sounds kind of suspicious. And I think there's real questions about whether these tech oligarchs, I don't know what else to call them, these tech billionaires have shown themselves having the values needed to be governing something as important and potentially civilizationally transformative as AI. And I discussed that with India's NewsX World.
Bill Gates is seeking a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping later this year to discuss global efforts to manage the rising risks linked to artificial intelligence. The Microsoft co-founder and philanthropist told officials that the country need to work together to address potential dangers from advanced AI systems. Gates said China could support limits to the release of potentially dangerous AI models if the United States takes the lead in establishing such measures. He argued that a global approach would help ensure AI developments remain safe without holding back innovation. Gates also wants countries to monitor AI's possible use in creating harmful biological materials or supporting biological attacks. He said such oversight would focus on security risks while allowing the technology industry to continue developing new applications. According to his spokesperson, his team is working to arrange a meeting with Xi Jinping during his next China visit, which tentatively planned for November. Gates previously met with Xi in 2023 when he became the first foreign entrepreneur hosted by the Chinese president after the pandemic. Gates said he believes AI represents a major shift in human technology and requires strong policy management from governments around the world. He also raised China's efforts to protect children from AI companion addiction while warning that the global leaders need to act quickly to address the broader risk of rapidly advancing artificial intelligence. When we examine what is taking place or what Gates is actually requesting right now, is Gates essentially calling for an international framework for an AI system similar to the way countries cooperate on nuclear or biological threats?
I mean, I'm not sure what Bill Gates is calling for at this point. I'm not sure what authority he has to do this. I think that this is a bit of reputation laundering for Bill Gates. If viewers recall, Bill Gates was implicated in the Epstein files in a major way in some very scandalous stuff earlier this year and late last year. His name came up quite a bit in the Epstein files. He seemed to have spent quite a lot of time on Epstein's island. And this is, I think, perhaps an attempt for himself and his public relations team to reboot his identity. Before it was about public health. Now it's about AI. I'm not sure if anyone's going to listen to Bill Gates and what his framework might be. But as to the broader issue, yes, this is a huge global concern, and it would be probably a great idea to have some kind of agency. For example, we have the International Atomic Energy Agency that oversees the proliferation and use of nuclear technology around the world. It would probably be a smart idea to have some kind of agency, a multilateral organization with the buy-in of world powers and smaller countries as well, that would govern the use and abuse of AI.
Now, Barzo Daragahi, why should government actually trust technology leaders to help regulate the very technology their companies help to create?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think they should, especially if you looked at the depraved behavior of some of these tech oligarchs. Bill Gates, as I said, was not someone you trust. He apparently tried to drug his wife because he thought he had gotten a venereal disease from a Russian prostitute when he was on Epstein Island. Elon Musk, he's platforming Nazis on his social media outlet. Peter Thiel, these people have really bad track records in terms of their actions and their values. They should absolutely not be trusted. These people should be monitored. Their companies should be broken up, perhaps even, and their assets made into non-monopolies. There should be antitrust regulations against them. I think, for example, India has been pretty good about monitoring the predatory practices of some of these big tech companies that are pursuing AI. These are companies that need to be seen and watched over and not allowed to govern themselves. Absolutely, there should be an adult in the room because these tech oligarchs are definitely not adults.
Yes, because as we examine Mr. Barzo Daragai, as we examine we have had the recent lawsuit of TikTok and as well as Instagram's founder of Meta, and they're all revolving security for children. Now, how will this further help if Bill Gates is to meet with President Xi Jinping and create, I would say, as a model to actually govern these systems and these tech companies? How would that go about?
Well, I'm not sure. I think that would be an interesting case study in creating an organization to monitor these organizations. But I think that first and foremost, there need to be checks on these people's power. Some of these companies should be broken up. For example, does Meta really need to own both Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp? Does Alphabet need to own both Google and YouTube? And then Google has all these other components that should be broken up. And there's been talk of breaking them up. For example, separating search from the browser. That's one of the things that they talk about. So first of all, these companies need to be cut down to size. These oligarchs need to be examined. They need to have their riches taxed or probably even taken by some of the governments that are overseeing them. And there needs to be some kind of punitive action against them for their predatory practices, including creating algorithms that are addictive to children and using those to keep people hooked. Nader Etiam is an energy analyst and the head of MENA operations at Argus Media. This is a news outlet that focuses on energy markets worldwide. Nader, thank you so much. I learned something, Nader. I learned that, and I have to disclose this as a journalist, I learned that we might be related.
Yep, I heard the same thing. I think we probably heard this from the same source.
From my cousin, my first cousin in London. He said he's one of our relatives. So I should disclose that. I didn't know that before I interviewed Nader before, friend of the show. I should disclose that we have a family relationship by marriage. And that's fantastic. That's wonderful. So
That's
maybe
right.
Nowruz will be able to see each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Family setting. So I guess I just want to ask you, I was just telling listeners and viewers about this STS, the ship-to-ship transfer, and this amazing, extraordinary photograph that was published by Tanker Trackers showing the operation. It was really telling, showing all these ships doing this very expensive and very labor-intensive and very potentially risky operation. And I was wondering if you had been monitoring that and what you think of these STS transfers.
Yeah, I mean, we have been monitoring it. We have Freight Desk who have been looking at this kind of stuff for weeks and weeks on end. It is interesting. It's not something particularly new. It's actually been a mechanism that several of the Mideast Gulf countries, the Arab Gulf countries, countries have been using to try and essentially get their oil outside of the strait during this time. Effectively, because of the uncertainty, because of the risk that has existed, you have a lot of customers who want the oil unable to go in or unwilling to go into the strait. So what the national oil companies have decided is basically they are going to shoulder the cost. They're going to shoulder the risk of actually getting their oil outside this so-called area of most risk to a place where in theory there's less risk, where customers will be able to actually take on that crude. So that's why we've been seeing more of these STS operations. And also alternatively, you've had some NOCs, national oil companies, actually shipping their oil to storage outside the strait, and then the customers will come and pick up the oil from that storage. It doesn't have to be any immediate kind of ship-to-ship situation. But it is fascinating, and this is where we kept hearing about these shuttle tankers. So the tankers that have been moving the oil inside and outside of the strait are these shuttle tankers. And frankly, what we saw from the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, this authority that the Iranians set up about 3-4 months ago, which would basically oversee, Iran's management of the strait. That's what really, I think, triggered this announcement of kind of new tightened rules of how things are going to work in the strait under Iranian purview. Effectively, these shuttle tankers were doing the job, and Iran didn't like it because the more oil that goes out, it erodes Iran's leverage.
Yeah. Do you think there is a chance that Iran is getting a cut? Because they could be attacking a lot more aggressively than they are. They're allowing it. And in the case of tanker trackers, they were saying that even one shipment of Iranian gas was participating in this venture. Hi, I'm Borzu Deragahi, host of the Badlands podcast and writer of the Badlands newsletter. You can find me on Spotify. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Apple Podcasts. You can also find me on Substack. That's where I'm usually at Borzou, borzou.substack.com. Now, I'm trying to get people to upgrade their subscriptions and get paid subscriptions. I have enough ethics that I wouldn't put my lovely teenage daughter in this video in a bid to encourage people to upgrade, to show what a nice person I am and how I'm deserving, and I need a little bit of extra cash to help take care of my life and keep doing this work. But I am shameless enough to show you my daughter's cute puppy, lovely puppy, Bella. Hey, Bella. Hey, Bella. Good doggy. This is such a good dog, such an amazing puppy. She's super, super sweet, super nice. I don't know what this has to do with geopolitics, but I know that she's a super lovely puppy. And if I could get a little bit of cash to help pay for her treats and her training. Hey, puppy. Good puppy. I love puppies. And if you love puppies too, maybe you should subscribe to Badlands. Get a paid subscription as a gift for anyone in your life who might be interested. Thank you so much.
This is the thing. We've been hearing about that. I cannot confirm ultimately whether, I have heard this, that there have been some tankers which, if not Iranian, have been carrying Iranian, in this case, oil or crude oil products that may have been hit, which could obviously play into this whole thing that, the Iranians want to create a narrative and a situation, a sense of instability and a bit of